Okay, so imagine this. It's the mid-2020s and you just picked up a new action-adventure game. Your protagonist has no gun, no sword, no small creature that you can command or control for battle, no jump, no vehicle, nothing. You are full-on raw dogging the game with the only thing you've got, your fists, but they ain't for punching. That is, in a nutshell, this indie gem, Bloodless. But before we get into it, if you're new here, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more reviews and other random gaming stuff. Now let's get to it. Hello fellow freaks, geeks, and normies, and thank you for stopping by to hear my thoughts of the game Bloodless, developed by Point and Sheep and published by 3D Realms. The aesthetics in Bloodless are akin to your early Game Boy or Game Boy Color games where it's a 4-bit pixel style, but this time in 4K. This action-adventure game is set in what I assume is feudal Japan, and you play as a woman named... Wait. A woman protagonist? This game is already way too woke for the uneducated, which is not me. I am just barely educated, which is apparently more educated than half the US. You play as Tomoe, who is a ronin who was the second hand to the shogun of the land, Akechi. This game starts with the reformed Tomoe, who refuses to ever wield a blade again. It's assumed that Tomoe goes AWOL after she realizes how much pain and death she leaves in her wake. You go through a brief tutorial while at the same time setting up your reason for not using weapons for the duration of the rest of the game, also known as the lore. The land is getting overrun by Akechi's army, creating a larger disparity between the strong and the weak, with more and more innocent blood being spilled. Tomoe comes back to her home, Bakugawa, not knowing how bad things have gotten, and now it is up to her to reclaim the land. But how? Well, by God's gift of parrying, of course! Oh my god, I love parrying. Okay, now I'm not Ongball. I mean, only Ongball is Ongball, and I would love to see him play through this game, but I do believe I have a decent reaction time for parrying. So, this game is built upon you understanding enemy attack patterns and timings to then parry their attacks to disarm the enemy and have them run away in fear. And I sort of lied, you actually do have a punch in this game, and you sort of have super attacks. But technically, it's not to lower their life bar. These punches and super attacks are lined with energy, or ki. The super ki attacks, otherwise known as secret techniques in this game, use your cherry petal meter, which is comparable to, I don't know, a super meter in a fighting game. The super ki attack is something that you have more or less at the beginning of each fight, but once used, you have to build up cherry petals, which is this game's super meter, by disarming enemies. So instead of, I don't know, killing the enemy, instead these punches or super ki attacks decrease enemies' poise or cause them to stagger, so then you can non-violently disarm them. Pretty cool mental gymnastics there, huh? The gameplay centers on dodging, parrying, and the key attacks that cause the stagger buildup. You have a stamina bar, so you can't just dodge or sprint indefinitely, and stamina does play a big role in later encounters, so it is something you have to be very mindful of. Unlike in Souls games, once you fully deplete your stamina, you have to wait until it is fully recharged in order to sprint or dodge again. Along the way, you unlock skill gems and crests that give you passive upgrades. Gems are used for your skill tree that will unlock things like parrying while standing still or having stronger super ki attack techniques, and crests are equipable items that unlock things like less stamina used while you're running or drink your tea faster. There are 5 major biomes, each with a relatively difficult boss at the end, so I can say that Bloodless is a Sekiro-like, but that's just about where the comparisons end. It's not like you're trying to perfectly time parries on a 10-hit string to then create stagger build-up so then you can execute your counterattack. The game doesn't move quite that fast. Instead, you utilize those 3 options of dodge, parry, or ki attack before, during, or after a 3-hit string at most. At any given point, you can utilize those 3 options to create your opening. This is where your skill expression and your comfortability with the mechanics can really shine. There is always an optimal route when fighting any singular enemy, as enemies' attacks have a clear tell as to what's going to happen next. If the enemy attack lights up white, your best option is to parry their attack. If the enemy attack lights up red, this attack is unparryable and must be dodged or interrupted with a ki attack if you unlock this ability in your skill tree. The safer play is usually to dodge the unparryable, then start blasting your ki all over their face. But there is a more godlike option, and you want to be a god, right? There is a very small window in which you can interrupt the unparryable red attack with a well-timed ki attack. This skill is not an option when you first learn your ki attack, but it is instead a skill that is unlocked as early as receiving your second skill gem. This well-timed punch causes a larger amount of stagger, and depending on the enemy, it could end up in an instant stagger, or just on the cusp of an instant stagger. This play requires you to have good positioning though, so it's not always the best option, especially later in the game where they tend to have 4 to 5 enemies, all with different movesets attacking you at the same time. Having encounters like that can be infuriating for some, but to me, I just say GG, or in Souls terms, get good. In all honesty, you do have to actually get good at this game. So to start, you can only take 3 hits before you die. You have 2 consumable slots, which are a large gourd and a mini gourd. The large gourd holds 3 swigs of 1 tea of your choice. Matcha tea, which recovers your health. Cherry tea, which gives you a couple of cherry petals for your super key attacks. Ginger tea, which grants unlimited stamina for a brief amount of time. And Adzuki tea, which ups your stagger buildup. The mini gourd only allows 1 swig of a tea of your choice. There is no traditional leveling up system in this game, so you're not getting experience after each battle. The only experience gained is based on your own personal ability to retain information on how to deal with the enemies. You do have some sense of progression though, which is through using your skill gems, which are given to you after completing certain battles or challenges. These skill gems are used to upgrade your parry, gourds, or key attacks, and that's about it as far as traditional upgrades go. Some skill points are locked away by some pretty tough challenge arenas though, so good luck unlocking all of your skills if that's something you want to do. One issue I have with this gameplay, and I alluded to this earlier, but sometimes, specifically in the second half of the game, you do get put into rooms with 3 or more enemies. At that point, it's more about running around and separating one enemy from the gang so that you don't get mixed up by a white attack by one person and then a red attack by another person. Even then, the range and speed on some of those unparryable red attacks can interrupt you when you think you have a safe parry on the singled out enemy, and that causes some HP loss in your end. Luckily, those encounters are mostly found in the challenge arenas, but they're still present to a lesser degree to progress through the later half of the game. So as far as how the game handles, well, it handles quite well. I'm sure some people might have an issue with the pairing window in general, or some of the situations the game puts you in, like I just talked about, where you're basically getting ganked and you feel overwhelmed. But the game does give you all the tools you need to overcome those obstacles. They do have a challenge arena, which are completely optional, but offer good rewards. If you do happen to step into some of those arenas and clear them, it makes some of the gank fights that are required for progression in the game a cakewalk. As you're making your way through the game, parrying this and that, drinking tea, blasting your key all over, the music plays a perfect accompaniment to your journey. It's not overly produced and it's not overly ambitious. If anything, it is lightly orchestrated and is delicate when it needs to be, but also brings out the most in those stressful battles. If I were to guess, the minimal orchestration is to mirror the minimal art direction of the game. Something that I think brings it to the modern age of gaming is that the composer Felipe Barbosa doesn't shy away from utilizing the more live orchestra sound. I think the decision overall is one that paid off. The pacing of the combat and what I would consider more modern reactions required for the gameplay makes it so that the music doesn't feel so out of place. Not only that, but the sound design of the game doesn't lean into that bit crunch sound at all. The only thing really retro about this game is the 4-bit look of it. When you disarm someone, there's a nice metal clank. There's also a satisfying sound that happens when you land a key attack or interrupt an unparryable attack. Had the sound design of the world been compressed and crunchy, then the choice of a live orchestral sound would have been awkward. But it fits. It only works this way though because the orchestration itself is quite limited. There is the obvious and more ambient string section, but because this is set in feudal Japan, Barbosa decides to use traditional Japanese instruments such as the taiko drums and shakuhachi, which is an end-blown bamboo flute, much different than the side-blown metal flutes that I'm sure you've seen Flute Guy from the Game Awards go ham on, as well as a Japanese zither. As a classically trained trombone player myself, the lack of brass is a bit sad, but it's understandable and actually welcomed because it would definitely make it too bright at times and much too heavy in others. The soundtrack itself does a good job encapsulating the feel of combat, exploration, and ambience. The only fault of it is that I don't think that there is any one melody that is an earworm, something that would hum after a session of gameplay. Compare that to something like Elden Ring boss themes or really any JRPG battle theme, and you can see why this falls a little short. Bringing it all together, does this game deliver on what it set out to execute? I believe it does, and it does it confidently. This game is quite difficult and you do have to be in the mindset that there's a bit of a steeper learning curve to make progress in this game. But once it clicks, the gameplay feels smooth and responsive. The only faults I can think of are that some of the gank fights do require you to run around in circles until one of the 50 people decide to attack you by themselves, so you can parry without getting out of position or in danger of getting hit by another enemy's unparryable. Also, there's not really much replayability to it other than the challenger units. Not that that's particularly a bad thing, but if you're trying to make this game your new personality with endless replays, this will not satisfy that itch. To me, the visuals are attractive enough, especially on an OLED monitor where we have the hard black background with rich contrasting colors. But that does make it, a downside if you don't prefer the 4-bit style. The original soundtrack accompanies the game perfectly, and the use of traditional Japanese instruments strengthens the immersion. But if you're looking for an earworm, then you won't find it here. So you can see that I thoroughly enjoyed my experience, but there was always a but. But it's a very specific but. If you want a difficult game requiring high execution, then the but doesn't exist.
The limit does not exist. The limit does not exist.
If you want a decent story with challenge arenas as a way to test your grit and be done after that, then the but doesn't exist. If you want music that is immersive, but not necessarily something that will stick with you after you leave the game, then the but doesn't exist. Instead, what does exist is a well put together package with tight controls, smooth gameplay, a decent story, and music that puts it all together. Bloodless, developed by Point and Sheep and published by 3D Realms, gets an 8 out of 10. Thanks so much for sticking with me through the end of this review of an indie darling of mine of 2024. If you enjoyed what you heard and saw here, then like and subscribe, and be sure to join me and some of my friends on February 28th to March 2nd for my annual 48-hour Gameathon, which will stream here live on YouTube and on my Twitch at twitch.tv/LadyDonuts. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.